Today we have this photo of this white Siberian Husky. Her name is Blossom. First step, we're going to go ahead and crop in, do that 4:5 crop because this is going to be used on Instagram. And we're going to go ahead and just allow a little bit of negative space because the dog is facing over to the left. So we're not going to quite put this nose right on that corner. We're actually going to let a little bit of room there. I think that perspective is good. And the reason why we do that is we want to give the dog's eyes a little bit of room to look into. Step one, complete. Step two, grab this little eyedropper tool right here and go ahead and select your white balance. I'm going to pick a little spot on the cheek there, bring down the warmth. Right about there looks like the most neutral white. To check myself against the white balance there overall, I'm going to pump up the saturation all the way to 100. We see a little bit of yellow getting cast in here and here, and a little bit of green popping up in those shadows. It's uneven throughout the dog just because there's a little bit of shading. You'd see here, maybe that's a little bit blue. So that's just what we're dealing with. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that saturation. And when we go back, this seems to be about as white as we're going to get it. I'm going to go ahead and let Lightroom do a little bit of the work. Hit that auto function, and it did good enough for the background. We're going to edit the dog separately, so we're going to just ignore that. We're going to go to this mask tool. We're going to hit the subject mask. And we're going to go ahead and use this preset. This preset does a medium contrast curve, and then it does texture, clarity, dehaze, all set at 7, and then sharpness is pushed up to 17. But usually whenever I apply this curve, it's a little bit too weak in the shadows, a little too strong in the highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the shadows right about there. I'm going to drop the highlights. Not that much on this dog, actually, because it's a white dog. So really we're going to use the shadows to bring up rather than do anything to bring down. We're going to go ahead and bring those whites up a little bit too. We're going to bring those blacks up a little bit. The exposure go up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of warmth. And part of the reason is that I was just seeing too much blue in the face. So before and after. So the rest of this does turn a lot more yellow. The dog's not perfectly clean. So that's the trouble with white dogs is they're not white all over. That's a better white balance on that dog's fur. And then we're going to go ahead and just desaturate. And when we desaturate, it drops the exposure. So we're going to bring that exposure back up a little bit. Next step, we're going to go ahead and do this object brush, and we're going to go over the eyes. You can see the right eye there. So I'm going to see if this object selection tool will grab it. And it does. And we're going to go ahead and just increase the exposure. Not too much on this one, but just a little bit. Just lighten them up a little bit, add a little bit of saturation. We took some out, so we have a bit of latitude to add some back in and add a little bit of warmth because they're brown in this case. So probably not a pure Siberian Husky. I'm not sure. Do they have brown eyes? Do they not have brown eyes? Somebody let me know down in the comments. Well, the next step is to get rid of the leash. We're going to go ahead and pull this image over into Photoshop. Now what we got to do is we got our handy dandy remove tool. We're going to use Command plus, Control plus if you're on Windows. And we're going to use our right bracket, make this brush a little bit bigger, and very carefully, maybe not so carefully, go over that leash. Let it think about what it's done. All right. And it did a pretty good job. There's a little bit of weirdness with the fur here, so I'm going to go ahead and just smooth that out. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and just scan the dog for any sort of weird imperfections, mostly looking for unsightly stray hairs, maybe that little dark spot right there in this case. And I'm just cleaning up the dog. Now I'm done cleaning up the dog. That's really all I took this over to Photoshop to do because the background's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And through the magic of Adobe, it should be available in the room. Here we are back in Lightroom, and we're going to this HSL tool, and we're going to go to the saturation. And what I want to do here is I want to take those greens and I want to bring them down a little bit more. Just take a little bit of that green out of here. And I'm going to go to the hue, and I'm actually going to grab one of these greens. And now I'm going to take it over to the orange color here and give it kind of that autumn look to it. It's a little bit less distracting in the photo, which brings your attention more towards the dog and away from the background. Next up, we're going to do a post-crop vignette, darken up those corners and really bring the eyes towards the center of this photo here. It's nice and subtle, but it really does have that effect of making you focus on the subject here.